Okay, so hello to everybody, and let's start with a little bit of meditation to get into a good state of mind. So in the last session last week, I spoke about loving kindness, or metta is the Pali term, and I thought we could start with doing some meditation to help us generate loving kindness. If I remember correctly, we did do a little bit of meditation last week. One way of generating loving kindness is just to bring to mind individual people and then focus on those people and then say to ourselves, may you be happy. Really try to generate the wish for that person to be happy. So that's one way of generating loving kindness. And another way is by thinking about how we receive so much from others. So actually everything in our life, the food that we eat, even the water that we drink, the clothes that we wear, the house or apartment that we live in, all the things we own, the furniture, the utensils, the devices, and so on, books that we read, movies we watch, music we listen to, cars we drive in. So all of these things that we use in our life are made by other people. So we are dependent on others to be able to have all these things, which make our life enjoyable, and we're able to function, do things. And even our body, the body that we have, was brought into the world by our parents, our mother and father, and they looked after us when we were very small. So, all the things we have, including our body and all the things we use to keep ourselves alive, they come from other people. And also the knowledge that we have, all the things that we know, the skills that we have, the abilities that we have so that we can get a job and support ourselves and live independently in the world. So that also comes from other people, our teachers, and the people who built the schools and wrote the textbooks and so on and so forth. So everywhere we look in our life, anything we look at, we think about, where did that come from? It came from others. So contemplating what others do for us, how we are dependent on others, is also a way of opening up our heart to others. And, when we realize what they do for us, we naturally feel gratitude and want to do things in return to them. So let's just spend a little bit of time thinking about that and see how that might affect our minds. So make yourselves comfortable, but try to sit with your back straight. And let your body relax as much as possible. Let go of any tension there may be anywhere in your body. And also let your mind relax. So there may be thoughts in your mind related to things that you did earlier today. You're still thinking about those things, and you might even be feeling a little emotional about some of the things that happened. So decide that you will put those things aside for now and just let your mind be right here in the present moment, focused on what we are doing. And do the same with any thoughts you may have about what you're going to do later tonight or tomorrow. So in other words, put aside thoughts of the past and the future. And just be right here in the present moment and present place, wherever you are right now. You can pay attention to your breath coming in and going out for a few moments. That's a good way of settling down in the present. Now, just be aware of your body, sitting where you are. And now your body is fully developed, fully grown, and you're able to live on your own, take care of yourself, be independent. But our body wasn't always like this. Long time ago, just after we were born, our body was very tiny and very helpless and completely dependent on others. So I'm sure none of us can actually remember being a baby, but that was the case at the beginning of our life. Our body was tiny and helpless, and we were completely dependent on other people, usually our parents, our mother and father, but also other people who were caregivers at that time. And if those people hadn't taken care of us, we wouldn't be here today. So it was probably our mother who spent most of the time caring for us, feeding us, holding us in her arms, giving us attention and affection, changing our diapers when we made a mess, putting on clean clothes, putting us to bed, and so on. So taking care of a baby is really a full-time job. It takes a lot of time and energy. So our mother and other people who were around at that time did that work so that we could survive and be alive today. So try to get a sense of how kind those people were. There are other people who we depend on for our existence, our health, but we may never meet them. For example, the people who produce the food that we eat. Every day of our life, we consume a large amount of food, and that food is mostly produced by farmers who spend a lot of time sowing the seeds in the field, making sure they have water, harvesting them when they're ready, transporting them to a factory or the market. And lots of other people working in the factories and the markets and the transportation of the food from one place to another and so on. So lots of people. Even one plate of food, one meal that we eat could involve dozens of people working very hard to make that food available to us. And we might think, well, they're working to get money, and I pay money for the food that they produce. That's true, but what we're trying to do here is cultivate positive feelings towards others and kindness, treating others with kindness and compassion. And a good way to do that is to realize how kind they are to us by providing us with what we need, what we enjoy. And it is true as well with the clothes that we wear, the books that we read, the furniture we have in our house, our computers, phones, TVs, all the appliances we use to cook our food and clean our house and so on, and the house itself. So there are people who worked to produce these things and make these things available to us. Again, try to get a sense of the kindness of those people to provide us with the things we need and use and enjoy. So the point is to realize that we are not completely independent. We cannot live completely separate, cut off from other people and other beings. We are very much dependent on others. And if we realize what others do for us, it can open our hearts to feel appreciation and gratitude, and then want to treat them with kindness and compassion. So see if you can make a kind of resolution or determination that in your life you will keep this in mind. Awareness of how you are dependent on others, what others do for you, and to show your appreciation to them by being as kind and helpful, considerate as you can. So you could actually spend a lot of time on that meditation, thinking about all the different ways that we're dependent on others. I just spoke about a few examples, like our body and our food and our furniture and so on, but you can also think about the knowledge that you have, the abilities, the skills that you have, and how you're dependent on your teachers. So you can think about the teachers in your life and mentors and those people who have helped you to get to where you are now. So it's really, really an important quality to have, that sense of gratitude to others. And also in terms of Dharma, the Dharma practice or spiritual practice, I don't know if all of you have really studied much Buddhism, but in our tradition of Buddhism, we aspire to become Buddhas, to become fully enlightened, just like the Buddha. And the reason or purpose to become enlightened isn't just to have a nice experience ourselves, to take care of our own needs, but it's to be able to help others, to benefit others. And so to become a Buddha, we have to develop love and compassion and all these positive qualities, positive attitudes towards other people and other beings. If we don't do that, we won't make it to enlightenment. We won't have the necessary state of mind and the necessary qualities for our mind to reach enlightenment. So what that means is for the attainment of enlightenment, to become a Buddha ourselves, we are dependent on others as objects of our compassion and our love and our generosity and our patience and so on. So that's another way you can contemplate, that your own spiritual development, the development of these amazing qualities in the mind that will eventually enable you to become enlightened, is that you need others. Others help you to do that. And even with like patience is one of the qualities we have to develop in order to become a Buddha, to become enlightened. And they say that in order to develop patience, we need difficult people. Yeah. Really, it's true. I mean, if everybody around us is very nice and easy to get along with, then our patience isn't challenged. Yeah, it's kind of easy to be patient with people like that. And so our patience just remains at a kind of not so well developed level. But when there's somebody who's difficult, who's annoying, who triggers off our anger and our irritation, then that kind of person is actually very, very helpful for us. They help us to grow our patience, to increase our patience, to make our patience stronger, more stable. So they actually say the enemy is your greatest teacher for the practice of patience. And that's hard to do when, the person is right there in front of us doing whatever they do that's so annoying. We just want them to go away or punch them in the face or something like that. But somebody who's really sincere about following the path to enlightenment will understand, this person is helpful for me. This person is, a good object for me to practice patience and increase my patience. So every living being provides us with lots of opportunities for spiritual practice and spiritual growth. And so that's why someone who's following this path, the Bodhisattva path, is able to feel love and compassion and great appreciation and gratitude towards everyone, every living being, even those who are really difficult. Okay, so today I thought we'll move on to the second of the 4 immeasurable thoughts, which is compassion. Does anyone have any questions about loving kindness before we move on from there to compassion? Nope. Well, if questions come up later, you can ask. So, Patty, could you put up the file that I sent?
Yeah, Lou is going to do that. She's on it.
Okay. Yeah, so I put a passage from the Metta Sutra here. It was in the file that we had last week, which I think you were able to download if you wanted. But there's this sutra. We didn't have time to look at it last week. It's called the Metta Sutra. Metta meaning loving kindness. And so these words here are like the heart of that sutra. It's quite beautiful. So the Metta Sutra is something you could read and contemplate to help you generate loving kindness. So these are the actual words of the Buddha, what the Buddha said about loving kindness. So here he says, even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness. One should sustain this recollection. So there are practitioners who might, at least for a period of time, really focus on cultivating loving kindness and would use these words and these thoughts and just like all day long work on having this attitude of loving kindness and imagine it radiating out in all directions to all the living beings and have that in their mind all day long, whatever they're doing, standing, walking, working, driving, jogging, and so on. Just, yeah, and the more you do it, the more you make your mind familiar with this attitude of loving kindness, the more it does become your natural way of being, your sort of default mode. And so it's a very good thing to do for yourself as well as for others because it's such a beautiful state of mind. It's very good for your own well being. Okay, so then compassion. This is the second of the four measurable thoughts. And the verse that we saw before about the four measurables, the second line of that prayer is about compassion. So it says, may all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So compassion is the wish for oneself and others to not suffer. That's how it's explained in the Buddhist teachings. And there's a really good book I recommend if you're interested in compassion. It's called A Fearless Heart. It's written right there on the screen. Written by Thupten Jinpa. Thupten Jinpa is he's a Tibetan, and he did the monastic studies, and so he became a geshe, like a professor of Buddhist studies. And he also went to, I think it was Cambridge or Oxford, and got a degree in Western philosophy, I believe. So he's very well educated, both in Tibetan Buddhism and also in Western thought. He's done a lot of translation when the Dalai Lama teaches. He's translated a lot. He's also done a lot of work with the Mind and Life Institutes. So he's an amazing person. And so he was involved with some people at Stanford University in developing a training program in compassion, teaching people how to be compassionate in a secular way, not necessarily people interested in Buddhism, but people in the healthcare profession, for example, who want to have more compassion. So they developed this program, which is It's being taught in many places now, and it's apparently very, very effective. So this book he called A Fearless Heart is all about that program and how they developed it, and it includes some of the meditations that they use in that program. So it's very, very good about compassion. And so in that book, this is how compassion is explained: a sense of concern that arises when we are confronted with another's suffering and feel motivated to see that suffering relieved. And so the photo here, I think, is a good a way to test our compassion. So just below the photo, this is also from Thupten Jinpa's book. He says there are three things that happen when compassion arises. The first thing that happens is awareness of suffering or need. So this is cognitive. So for example, looking at this photo of the little child, it's easy to recognize that this child is suffering or is in need, right? So the expression on the child's face, the tears coming. I don't know if it's a boy or a girl. I think it might be a boy. Tears coming from his eyes, his mouth. You can sort of imagine his mouth quivering. And so it's very clear just by looking at this face that this little being is suffering, is in need. And then the second thing that happens is sympathetic concern. So this is more emotional. So we probably feel something in our heart, right? In our chest. We don't just feel like stone, cold, unmoving, unfeeling. We feel, especially if you're a woman, you immediately want to pick up this child and comfort him and, make his tears go away. So there's this sympathetic concern, like, oh, what's happening with this child? Why is he so sad? And then the third step is wishing that suffering to end. Okay, so that's like an intention. I want to relieve this child's suffering. And all of these things can happen very quickly or even simultaneously, very fast, one after another. But if we break it down, these are the steps. This is what's going on in our mind or in our brain, if you prefer, that generate compassion. And in some cases, compassion may also lead to action. So we can't pick up this child because it's just a photograph. But if he was a real child in front of us, or maybe we saw this child in the park, lost, looking like he was all by himself and lost, then we would probably go up to the child and pick him up and, try to comfort him and then try to find his mother or whoever is his caretaker. So in an actual situation where there is a person, a being in need, then we may act physically in order to do something to relieve the suffering of this person or this being that we feel compassion for. So Buddhism says compassion is a natural quality that everybody has. It is part of our mind, our being. We do all feel it, at least sometimes, especially, towards people we already care about, our family members, our friends, our pets, and sometimes even with strangers. Yeah, like if you just saw this child in the park, it isn't someone you know, but I think with children and with small animals like small puppies and kittens and so on, those are beings that easily arouse our compassion. I don't know about you. I don't know how you feel about that, but for me, that's when I see a little animal or a little child who looks very sad or crying, then like immediately I feel like I want to do something to help. So it is something we all have, we all feel. And in Buddhism, the idea is to cultivate our compassion, to develop our compassion so that we feel it more often for more people, more beings. And, and that's, I mean, it's good to do that. It's good for ourselves because compassion is a very positive state of mind, but it's also good for others. If you try to imagine what the world would be like if people didn't have compassion, if compassion wasn't a part of human nature. So, as it is now, when there's like a disaster, a natural disaster, or there's a war, or some kind of situation where there's a number of people in need. They've lost their homes. Their homes may have been destroyed by floods or by fire or by a hurricane or whatever. And so people step up. Other people immediately, offer, please come and stay with me. They organize distribution of food and blankets and so on. So this is what human beings do. When other human beings are in need, they respond with compassion to help them. And so if that didn't happen, it would be terrible, if there was a flood or hurricane and all these people were homeless and hungry and cold and nobody went to help them. Everybody just went on with their lives and just ignored them. It wouldn't be very nice, would it? Especially if we were one of those people who lost our homes. Right? So fortunately, people do have compassion and they do respond, sometimes immediately, like, right away. They're in their car going to the place where they can offer help to those who are in need. I hear many stories and read many stories about people's compassionate actions, and it's just beautiful, so inspiring. So yeah, so compassion is good for us, it's good for others because there are people who need it, people who are in need, and so compassion motivates us to respond to their need and give them help. Yeah. So let's go down, move down. So there's another term that might seem similar to compassion, but not exactly. Empathy. There's been a lot of discussion, especially in recent years, about empathy. And different people might define empathy and compassion differently. But in Thupten Jinpa's book, which is based on not just Buddhist ideas, but also on science and research and so on, there is an explanation of the difference between empathy and compassion. They're not exactly the same. So empathy is our natural ability to understand others' feelings and share in their experience. So it's just part of our being, part of our nature, that we can understand what another human being is feeling. And we ourselves may have a taste of that feeling too. So empathy can work with any kind of emotion that another person has. So when we see somebody looking happy, like if we see children playing in a playground and their faces are all lit up with happiness and they're laughing and just obviously having a great time. So when we see that, then we can recognize, oh, they're having fun, they're happy, and we'll probably feel some happiness as well. Okay, so we have the ability to empathize with that feeling. And likewise, when we see somebody looking unhappy, like the little child in the photo, then we can understand this child is not happy and will probably feel some unhappiness as well. So empathy works with all kinds of feelings, you know, happiness, unhappiness, fear, depression, love. Okay, so we can just recognize what another person is feeling by their expression on their face, the tone of their voice, body language, and so on. But then compassion is specifically about when another person is suffering. Okay, so it arises from empathy. Empathy enables us to understand that the other being is suffering. And then compassion arises from that. Compassion is this concern that this other person is suffering and this wish for them not to suffer, and maybe even the wish to do something to relieve their suffering. So empathy and compassion are not exactly the same, but they are connected. Okay, so empathy, having empathy, enables us to have compassion. It leads to compassion. So, next point is benefits of compassion. So, if we understand how it's a beneficial experience to have, it's good for us, then we'll be more interested in wanting to cultivate it, to develop it, to have more compassion. So the first part there says research finds that if we feel compassion and act compassionately, we will be physically healthier and mentally happier, less stressed, and so on. So actually, last week when I mentioned the benefits of loving kindness, those are actually from this book, A Fearless Heart. And so the same benefits apply to compassion as well as to loving kindness. Both compassion and loving kindness are very positive states of mind that have positive effects on us, both physically and emotionally, mentally. They cause the release of hormones like serotonin, I think, and oxytocin, that's right. So there's certain hormones that get released when we feel kindness and compassion, and those make us feel good, feel happy. And so, and especially if we actually act in a compassionate way, we do things to help those who are suffering. So you've probably heard about this, that when the helper's high, they call it, when you're involved in helping others, you feel good, you feel happy. I read about I think they did one study of people who were jobless, who had lost their jobs. And when people lose their jobs, they sometimes can be quite down and depressed and feel useless. So they got these people to do volunteer work, service work, and then tested them and found that they had more happy hormones. What is it called? Endorphins. Yeah, there were more endorphins in their bodies when they were working to help others, and they felt better. They felt happier. They felt more useful rather than useless. So it definitely is beneficial for us to have more compassion and act compassionately. And then in Buddhism, compassion is very much emphasized in Mahayana Buddhism, the type of Buddhism that we follow in the Tibetan tradition. And as I mentioned earlier, the ultimate goal, the highest goal that we aim for is enlightenment, becoming a Buddha. And compassion is an extremely important aspect of our practice for attaining enlightenment. The whole purpose of attaining enlightenment is to benefit others. And that means having compassion for others, realizing that they are suffering, they are in need, and wanting to do something for them. And so it said that compassion is important all throughout our practice. In the beginning of our practice, compassion is what motivates us to get involved in practicing to reach enlightenment. I want to become a Buddha in order to help all living beings. So compassion is an essential element in the beginning of our practice. And it's also important in the middle, meaning while we are working on our spiritual development towards enlightenment, compassion keeps us going, enables us to not give up, get discouraged, lose interest, and so on. So it helps us keep going on the path. And at the end means when you reach enlightenment, you become a Buddha, then you of course, a Buddha naturally has compassion, but it's because of their compassion that a Buddha is then continuing to work for the benefit of all living beings. So it's said that Buddha makes a kind of vow or promise that they will continue working for all living beings until all living beings have become free of suffering. So they never give up, they never retire. They don't need to because they've already taken care of their own needs. So then they're able to completely focus on the needs of others. So it's an essential component of the spiritual path, especially in Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism. But there are some obstacles, hindrances to compassion. So let's go through those and see what we can do about them. So in the traditional Buddhist texts, they talk about a far enemy and a near enemy. The far enemy is the opposite state of mind. So the opposite state of mind to compassion is cruelty. So that's when we actually want to cause suffering to somebody or take delight in causing suffering. So I think we all know what cruelty is. We hear stories of cruelty, especially cruelty to animals. Lots of people do horrible things to animals. It's really shocking. But also for human beings. There's stories of torture, people who are imprisoned and tortured. It's just horrific what human beings can do to other human beings. So, and sometimes with a sense of joy, delight in causing suffering. It's hard to believe. It's hard to imagine. But on the other hand, if we look into our own minds, watch our own minds, we might notice maybe little traces of cruelty, like if there's somebody we don't like, and maybe especially if that person has done harmful things to us, has made us suffer, we might have thoughts of getting back at them, doing something to make them suffer. I want to make you suffer. Even if we never act those thoughts out, we might never do those things, but the thought might still be there. Yeah. Or even if we don't think of doing something harmful to the other person, if we hear that something bad has happened to them, like they got into an accident, they got injured, or somebody else did something harmful to them, we might, in our mind, secretly feel, ha ha ha, you got what you deserved. So that's kind of the same state of mind, cruelty, delight in suffering rather than feeling compassionate, the wish for someone to be free of suffering. So this is something to look out for in our mind. And if we do notice it in our mind, try to recognize this is a very negative state of mind. We shouldn't allow our mind to entertain those thoughts and feed those thoughts. Instead, we should apply antidotes. So one method that's helpful is just to contemplate how nobody wants to suffer, just as I don't want to suffer. Other people don't want to suffer as well. Put yourself in the other person's place, in the other person's shoes, and imagine if I was in that person's place, how I would feel. I would not be happy. I would not enjoy being treated like this. So yeah, um, it's like in Christianity, the golden rule: do unto others what you would want them to do to you, and the opposite: don't do to others what you wouldn't want them to do to you. So just understanding that that other person is just like me. They don't want to suffer, and I wouldn't want that suffering. So try not to wish suffering for others or take joy in others' suffering. So just try not to let your mind have such thoughts. And then the second one is pity. And this is a little tricky because I've looked it up in the dictionary. If you look up compassion in the dictionary, um, at least sometimes some dictionaries will say pity, as if pity and compassion are the same. But some people make a difference between pity and compassion. There's one Buddhist teacher. He's not alive anymore, but Stephen Levine. He did a lot of work with dying people and wrote a number of books about death and dying and how to help people who are dying. So, in one of his books, he explained the difference between compassion and pity by saying that when our love touches another person's suffering, that is compassion. When our fear touches another person's suffering, that's pity. So, I really like that explanation. And again, it's helpful to kind of look at your own experience. So if you see somebody who's suffering and you feel frightened, I mean, it's quite understandable. Sometimes if somebody's been injured, for example, and there's a lot of blood or they've been burned and, it can look really terrible. So you may feel fear and difficult to even look at them, much less go near them and try to offer your help. So there's a certain amount of concern. You do feel concern for this person. You do understand that they're suffering, but there's fear there that can stop you from going up and helping, getting close and helping the person. And I think that fear is probably in most cases about me. Like, I don't want to suffer. I don't want to, maybe catch what that person has. Some of that suffering might come onto me and then I would suffer. So there's a certain amount of self-centeredness, self-concern there that can stop us, can block us from really acting fully to help somebody who is in need. Just to relate some experience from myself, when I was quite young, I guess about 20, yeah, I was about 20 years old, and I was traveling, and I traveled through Europe and then North Africa, and in Morocco, I saw beggars. I think it's probably the first time in my life that I saw beggars, people who were sitting on the sidewalk with their hands out, or a bowl or something to collect money. And I don't think I had ever seen that before. And I really felt, you know, how terrible, that these people have to do that they are in such need that they have to beg like that. And so I did feel some concern for them, and I felt some impetus, I guess, some incentive to help them, do something for them. But I was fearful because I didn't have that much money myself, and I wanted to, make my money last as long as possible. Um, I really wanted to travel as much as I could, and I was living very cheaply and so on. So I was afraid of sharing my resources with these people. So I don't know if that's an example of this or not. There was pity there, but there was also this fear, like, you know, fearful of my own well-being, my own happiness, and so it stopped me from really, acting to help them. Um, Yeah, so pity is called a near enemy to compassion because it it can look like compassion, it can appear like compassion, but it isn't genuine compassion because genuine compassion is fearless, like the title of Thupten Jinpa's book, A Fearless Heart. Yeah. Ideally, when you have compassion, you're courageous. You're willing to go in there and do what needs to be done to help someone in need. And of course, that can be difficult to do, difficult to feel. But the more we work on developing our compassion and also decreasing our self-centeredness, self-centered concern, and our fear as well. So gradually, we will become more compassionate. Oh yeah, I'll tell you another story. Um, when I was a teenager, there were classmates. I guess in high school, some of my classmates would volunteer to go to homes of elderly people and visit them and just talk to them and cheer them up. The idea was to offer them company and just be kind to them, bring some joy into their lives. And I didn't do that because I was incredibly shy, and it wasn't easy for me to talk to people, and I kind of imagined I'd go there and I wouldn't know what to say. I just feel really uncomfortable with these people who I didn't know. Um, so that's another example. I did feel concern, and I did feel, oh, that was a good thing to do, but I'm too shy. I can't do that. But now, over the years, working on overcoming my shyness and gaining more confidence and also increasing my love and compassion, I've gotten to the point where, yeah, I can talk to strangers and smile and be cheerful with them and, talk in ways that hopefully will bring them some happiness. So the point I'm making is even if you do have difficulty with compassion and acting in a compassionate way, it's not that you can't do anything about that. It is possible to work on whatever obstacles you may have and learn to be more outgoing, more confident, more courageous in acting out your compassion. Yeah, so number three is fear. So I did already talk about that. That could be involved in pity. Um, but also when it comes to acting out our compassion, we also need to use common sense. So, for example, I don't know how to do CPR. I don't know how to take care of somebody who's had a heart attack. And so, if I encountered somebody who was, really seriously injured or in need of some kind of help that I wasn't able to give, then in that kind of situation, it's probably be better for me not to try to do something because I might do the wrong thing and make things worse for the person. But you can still act in some kind of way. You can try to find somebody who has that skill or call 911. Okay, so there's always something you can do to help a person who is injured or in distress or whatever. Or even just to sit with them and hold their hand, recite some prayers, or just mentally generate positive thoughts and feelings for them and send that kind of energy to them. So there's always something that can be done, even if you don't have the medical knowledge and the medical skills to help with what the person actually needs. And then number 4, denial. So I think this can happen because of, nowadays with the news, with social media, we have access to all kinds of terrible stories. It's like every day, if you pay attention to the news, there's so many distressing things happening. There's wars and there's fighting and there's murders and there's suicide attacks and there's natural disasters. There's just so many stories of terrible things happening to people. And if we open up our mind and, read all that news and think about all of that, then we can feel overwhelmed. It can be overwhelming, and we can become kind of distressed and despair. Actually, 4 and 5 are kind of similar. They're kind of close. So one thing we might do is kind of shut down and just say, I don't want to know. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to look at it. A kind of denial of the existence of suffering because it's too much and we may feel helpless, that we can't do anything. And yeah, so we may respond just by denial. And again, from my own experience, I first, and I guess I could say the first encounter I had with Buddhism was when I was in university. And I'd read a few books before that, but never met anybody who was a Buddhist. But when I was in university, I met a woman who was a student of a Zen master, Suzuki Roshi. And so she was a practicing Buddhist. And I told her I wanted to know something about Buddhism, and could she explain to me something about Buddhism? So we got together, and she started telling me about the Four Noble Truths, which is, the very first thing that the Buddha taught when he began teaching. And the first noble truth is the truth of suffering, and stating that, everybody has suffering, life, not life, but there is suffering. Suffering exists in the world. And I immediately reacted by saying, what? How can you say that? Life is wonderful. Life is beautiful. And she just looked straight in my eyes and she said, I can see that you are suffering. And it was almost like she'd slapped me in the face. I was so shocked. I couldn't say anything because I knew she was right. And it's actually true. I'd had a lot of unhappiness, a lot of suffering in my life. Not so much physical, but more mental, emotional suffering in my life. And yet here I was trying to say, life is wonderful, life is beautiful. So she really, kind of broke through my denial. So that was denial. So what was happening in my mind was I was trying to pretend that everything was okay, even though it wasn't. Trying to pretend that I didn't have suffering, even though I did. So I think everybody probably at certain times in their life falls into that denial. And what we can do sometimes with denial is escape or try to escape, like with drugs, with alcohol, with TV, movies, music, just keeping busy. So there's lots of different things we can do to try to avoid or deny or escape from suffering. But that doesn't work. Yeah. Sooner or later, we do need to face the reality of suffering, both our own suffering and the suffering of others. And this is what the Buddha said. He said, there is suffering. You need to acknowledge it. And then you can do what needs to be done to become free of suffering, to overcome suffering. But first you have to acknowledge it. So with denial, that doesn't work. And then, so number 5 is despair. So that can happen if we do open up to the reality of suffering, the existence of suffering. But then we feel, oh, there's just so much suffering. I'm sure a lot of people are feeling that now. We've had this pandemic for more than 2 years now. And it's affected everybody's lives in not such positive ways. Now the war in Ukraine, and just so many bad things, so much bad news happening. So then people can sometimes fall into despair, where we feel, oh, what to do? There's nothing to be done, and feel really depressed and lose heart, lose courage, lose hope. And so that isn't helpful either. So denial, number 4 and 5, denial and despair are a bit like two extremes. Either we, just close our eyes and pretend it's not there, or we open our eyes and look at it, and then we just feel overwhelmed, like, oh, I don't know what to do. So the ideal way is between those two extremes, a kind of middle way. So the middle way would be to open up and acknowledge the existence of suffering, but do it in a way that you maintain hope and courage and other positive qualities, like, I want to help, I want to do something about suffering. I have a few ideas from Buddhism about how that can be done. One is the Buddhist explanation of impermanence, which isn't just a Buddhist idea, it's a reality. It's the truth of things, that nothing lasts forever. And that's true for suffering. Okay, so suffering is there for a while, but then it passes. It's not something permanent, eternal. So contemplating the impermanence of suffering is helpful, to see it as impermanent rather than permanent. So that can help us to avoid despair. Another idea from Buddhism is that suffering isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can be helpful for certain things. For example, for those who want to follow a spiritual path, suffering can be useful. It can help us increase our patience, to increase our compassion, to understand, oh yeah, just like me, other people suffer too. And now I know what it's like for them, and I want to help them. So if we never experience any suffering ourselves, then it'd be quite difficult to have compassion for other people who are suffering. But when we go through suffering, we know what it's like, and then that helps us be compassionate and want to help others. So there's certain lessons that can be learned, certain good qualities that can be developed when we do go through suffering. So it isn't necessarily a bad thing. That doesn't mean we should try to make suffering for ourselves or others. We don't need to do that. There's already plenty of it. But the point is to see that suffering itself isn't necessarily bad. It all depends on how we look at it and how we work with it, how we deal with it. It can be helpful. But we should still try to relieve suffering whenever we can. And so, yeah, so that's another point, is to just be practical when there is suffering. Somebody is suffering, or a group of people are suffering. We have to ask ourselves, what can I do? Is there something I can do? It may be that there isn't something that can be done, or we don't have the ability to do it. Okay, so we have to use like common sense, wisdom, intelligence to figure out, what can I do? And if there is something we can do, then put our energy into it. On the other hand, if there isn't anything that can be done, it doesn't help to just be depressed and feel, in despair and distressed. That doesn't do any good. I always feel that even if I can't do something on a practical level, I can do something on a spiritual level. So by making prayers and doing meditation and dedicating the positive energy to whoever it is that's suffering, that is something that I can do. There's always something that can be done. So those are just a few ideas from the Buddhist teachings that can help us to have that middle way of being open to and acknowledging of suffering, the existence of suffering, without being overwhelmed by it and falling into despair. Does that make sense? I mean, all of these things do take time. It's not something instantly, you get it and then you're free of that problem. But gradually over time, it's like a learning process. And then the last one, number 6, is self-centeredness. So this is a big topic, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, because if we want to follow the path to enlightenment, the Bodhisattva's path, self-centeredness is a huge obstacle. That's where we feel I am the most important person in the universe. Everything has to revolve around me. Everything has to be good for me. Everybody has to be nice to me, and so on. So that's kind of our default mode, our way of living our life. It's all about me. And that kind of attitude, we all have it. It's, don't feel bad. But it's a big obstacle to developing compassion and love and following the path. And so we try to be aware of our self-centeredness and try to reduce it, not let it be our number one priority in life, and instead learn to be more other-centered, to be focused more on others. The opposite of self-centeredness could be called altruism. So altruism is where we're more focused on others and their welfare, their well-being, and doing what we can to help others. So gradually, over time, working on this, we can learn to be less self-centered and more focused on others. And I mean, all of us do at certain times have this ability to be unselfish. For example, parents, some of you have probably raised children. So in the role of a parent, you have to put yourself aside to the side, because your children, especially when they're very small, very young, they're so needy. They really need your love and your care and your attention and your energy. And so, if you're super self-centered, super selfish, then you're not going to make a very good parent. So if you want to be a good parent to your children, you have to be willing to lower that side of yourself and put your children's needs first. So, so to overcome self-centeredness, it's good to just recognize how it is a problem. It's not something that's good for us. It actually brings suffering and problems. If it comes up in relationships, then it's a disaster. You know, if we feel I am more important than the other person, then that can lead to a lot of problems, a lot of conflicts, and so on. So just to see the disadvantages, the downside of being selfish, and then the benefits of being altruistic. How altruism, caring for others, is so much more beneficial for others, but also for yourself. You yourself will be happier, feel better about yourself, more fulfilled, and so on. So just comparing self-centeredness with altruism, and hopefully you will conclude that altruism is better. You want to do that more. Okay, so let's do a little bit of meditation on compassion. So this is one method. It's kind of similar to the meditation on loving kindness, except that here we're cultivating the wish for the other person that we're meditating on to be free of suffering. So we'll just do this for a few minutes, and then we'll leave some time if any of you have any questions. So make yourselves comfortable. And again, put aside any other thoughts that may be in your mind that aren't related to what we're doing. And decide to just focus your mind on this meditation. And to get in touch with the feeling of compassion, remember a time when you did have that feeling. You've seen somebody who looked unhappy, depressed, distressed, or in pain or injured, and compassion arose in your heart. You wanted to help this person, to relieve their suffering, to give them whatever help they needed. So now bring to mind someone in your life, family member or friend, and contemplate that just as you don't want suffering, problems, bad experiences, so does this person. This person feels just the same way as you. They don't want any suffering, any pain, any problems, any difficulties. that as long as we are ordinary beings, not enlightened beings, we will experience problems. That's just the nature of our life, our existence in samsara, unenlightened existence. Even though we don't want problems, we don't want suffering, we can't avoid it. These things happen. So focusing on this person, generate compassion for them. You can do that by just saying to yourself some words. Just do this silently in your mind. Words like, may you be free of suffering. May you be free of physical suffering, pain. May you be free of mental suffering. So just try your best to generate that feeling, that state of mind of wishing this other person to be free of whatever suffering they have, both now and in the future. And now think of another person, this time someone you're not so close to. Could be a neighbor, someone you work with. And have a mental picture of that person. Imagine them right in front of you. And then contemplate that this person is basically just like you and just like the last person you thought of. They wish to not have any suffering, physical or mental. They wish to be free of problems and pain and suffering. And then see if you can go the next step of wishing them to be free of their suffering. So you can say to yourself some words, some phrase like, may you be free of suffering. May you be free of physical suffering. May you be free of mental suffering. Now really open up your mind, your heart, and think about all people and all beings. There's one thing we all have in common, and that is the wish to not suffer. Nobody likes pain, hunger, fear, depression, grief. Nobody wants painful experiences, suffering. See if you can generate the sense of how wonderful it would be if all people and all beings could be free of physical suffering, mental suffering, all kinds of suffering. If it's difficult to really feel that, just say the words like, may all beings be free of suffering. So that was very brief, but hopefully you get the idea. So that's a way of cultivating compassion. So as much time as you have, as much energy as you have, you can think of individual people and one by one wish them to be free of suffering. And then at the end, good to open up to all people and all beings, wish all of them to be free of suffering. So it's something you can do in a formal meditation, sitting in meditation, but it's also something you can do when you're with people, moving around at work, in a shopping mall, on a freeway. you know, just take a moment to think about the people around you and think, yeah, I wish all these people could be free of suffering. So even just in a moment, a couple of moments, a minute or two, you can change your mind into a state of compassion. So it's much better than feeling despair and hopeless and, oh, the suffering is terrible, there's nothing that can be done. Well, you may not be able to, at that moment, actively, physically, practically do something to relieve suffering. Like if you're watching television, seeing images on the TV, you can't, at that moment, do anything to relieve their suffering. But just to put yourself into that state of mind, may they be free of suffering. I wish them to be free of suffering. That's changing your mind into compassion, making your mind familiar with compassion. So this is just a very brief introduction to a very big and complex topic. There's a lot more things to be said about compassion, like, for example, dealing with people who may have, who may behave badly, be abusive, or abusing drugs and alcohol and so on. So, we might think being compassionate means being nice and being soft and, letting them do what they want. But that's not being compassionate. But sometimes being compassionate means being tough. And I think if you're parents, you would know that. You can't always say yes to your children and let them do whatever they want. That is not good for them. So, with a compassionate heart, with the wish to benefit, to do what's really beneficial for children or students in a class, or if you're working with alcoholics, drug addicts, and so on, sometimes you have to be tough and say no, but you do it with kindness in your heart. So that's just one thing that, is a common question about compassion. It doesn't mean you always have to be soft and sweet and say yes. There's an expression that's used sometimes, idiot compassion. So idiot compassion is you care, you want to help, but you don't have the wisdom and the skill to know how to help. What's the best way to help? So what you do might be the wrong thing, and you might kind of make a mess of things rather than be helpful. Well, it's a learning situation, and at least you did have a good intention. That's the important thing. But it's good to balance compassion, compassionate heart, with an intelligence and wisdom and skill in, knowing how to help each person, each situation. So it's a learning process, something that takes time and practice. And sometimes we do make mistakes along the way, but at least we can learn from our mistakes and know what not to do next time. Okay, any question? We got a few minutes before the end of time.
Yes, go ahead, Kim.
Thank you, Venerable. It's always good to see you. Thanks for doing this. One of the questions I have, and I've read Venerable Jinpa's book, and it's been, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, which is, as you said, it's fantastic. But one of the questions I have is, do you see any way to help others remind themselves of their compassion, their connection to others? And I think of, and I know this is a super big one, but when I think of somebody like Putin, I can only think that he's so detached from his own humanity, his own compassion, that's why he can justify some of the actions that he's doing. But do you see, other than, I would say, having good boundaried compassion ourselves for the folks like that, do you have other thoughts on how to remind people of their own connection and compassion?
Well, that's a big question, but I do believe in the power of being that way yourself. Like Gandhi says, be the change you want to see in the world. I really feel that's the most effective thing. Like, we also have this expression, actions speak louder than words, and I think that's true. You can give lectures on compassion and write books on compassion, but if you yourself don't embody it, act it out, that's not going to be very effective. On the other hand, if you yourself really do your best to live compassionately, to be a compassionate person, then there's a greater chance that you'll influence other people. Because I think everybody does have at least the seeds of compassion in their mind, and maybe those seeds just need to be watered. Maybe they just didn't get watered before. And so if we ourselves can act in a compassionate way and show what compassion is by our own way of being and our actions, that is a way of watering other people's compassionate seeds. But we shouldn't do that with expectation. We shouldn't have this expectation, I'm going to be compassionate and you better be compassionate too. That might just lead to disappointment. But just be consistently compassionate, and then there's some possibility that it will influence others and help them. It may take time, yeah, it may take a long time, but if you just keep doing it, then I think that's the best way. And if you believe in prayer, making prayers to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas to please help this person, they have more power than we do. So making prayers to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to help. I mean, another thing in Buddhism, I've been teaching some therapists, some psychoanalysts actually in Israel, and they're already very, very compassionate people. But one of them made the comment that learning, I mean, they've been learning about Buddhism, and this one person said that she's skeptical about rebirth, reincarnation, multiple lives. She has a hard time believing that. But on the other hand, thinking in that way gives her some hope with certain patients. Because some patients, they're just so intractable. And it's like, I guess, you work with that patient for years and years and years, and they don't seem to be getting anywhere. So when she thinks about, okay, maybe in this lifetime they won't change, they won't improve. But if you think about, okay, there's other lives, then it gives her some sense of hope rather than despair. And so I think that can work with also people like Putin, I mean, maybe he won't change in this life. Maybe he'll continue being that way right to the end of his life. But Buddhists would say, well, never mind, he's got another life, another one. Eventually, sooner or later, he will change. He will learn from, he'll learn his lessons and become a compassionate person. So I think that's one thing I think that does give Buddhists hope and courage and help us to avoid falling into despair. Because Buddhism says eventually everybody will become enlightened. There's no person who's totally hopeless and will be, evil and hateful and cruel forever and ever and ever. Everybody will eventually change and become enlightened. So there's always hope. Okay, so we'll stop there and let's just take a few moments to do a mental dedication of the positive energy we've created by coming together, spending this time together, looking at these beautiful topics of kindness and compassion and trying to generate these in ourselves. So this is a really good thing to do. We've definitely created a lot of good energy. So let's now dedicate or share that energy with all other people and beings. May it help all beings get in touch with their own feelings of compassion and kindness and bring those out in themselves in their interactions with others. May everyone learn to be kind and compassionate with each other and stop doing things that are harmful, that just create more suffering. And may it help us all get closer to enlightenment, our ultimate state of being. Okay, so thank you for joining.